Hey there, welcome to the Future Salespeople Sales Round Robin. My name is Andrew Voislavic, co-founder, and I'm joined by co-founder and CEO, Alex Guest.
How's it going, Andrew?
Alex, I'm living the COVID dream. How about yourself?
About the same. Excited to be kicking off one of our first video blogs here. What do you have for
Yeah,
us?
I actually got a pretty good one. And so, as we had talked about, we just want to share a little bit about the sales round robin with everybody. So, the sales round robin is going to be our weekly feature in which Alex and I are going to take turns going through the interwebs and finding what we feel is the most compelling research, news tidbit, acquisition, skill, or best practice. Anything or everything related to sales revenue can be featured in the sales round robin. How's that sound to you, Alex?
Sounds perfect. What did you
Sweet.
track down this week?
Oh, this is a good one. And as you know, this is something that's near and dear to my heart. So um, it's funny because ever since I left the Miller Hyman Group, I've been on this mission to try to make buying easier. I worked for one of the world's largest sales consultancy companies to make selling easier. But one of my big takeaways was how the heck do we actually make buying easier? And so this past week, when we were when I was going through doing research, I saw that LinkedIn actually put out this thing called a buyer first study. And so it had me captivated. I got in, I wanted to learn and wanted to research more. And lo and behold, Alex, this was a pretty interesting read in some ways. And we'll link it in the show description. Everybody can and should read this article. Um, but it's pretty funny. So the way that I took this article is that LinkedIn did this research study with over 500 sales professionals, and they wanted to learn about how sales has changed as a result of COVID, or at least that's how they're presenting this. Sales has changed as a result of COVID. And really, that their takeaway was that because of COVID, because of moving to a virtual selling environment, this is better. This is better. Sales professionals will not change. And as a result, this is now a new world in which we should be living in which we put buyers before sellers. And so I wanted to bring this to the front because in many ways we believe in buyer enablement, sales enablement, and at the same time it's self-serving because this is LinkedIn. LinkedIn is also saying that we should be moving virtually to sell. So this is the article I brought to us this week to go through and review is the buyer first piece from LinkedIn. Any questions so far, Alex? What are your thoughts?
No, it's good. And I definitely agree. When it comes down to it, virtual selling is not new to LinkedIn. I've definitely interacted with their sales professionals, some good, some bad. It usually starts out with LinkedIn outreach. So they're definitely used to virtual selling. I would be surprised if you see too many of the LinkedIn sales reps go on site or take inbound calls. So it doesn't seem like virtual selling, to your point, is new for LinkedIn at all. It seems a little opportunistic. Can't blame them for that. I think a lot of organizations are being opportunistic in these times. So it makes a lot of sense that they would talk about this. It'd be nice if they were a little more honest or forthcoming that this isn't necessarily new to COVID for them, but I mean, they made their choice on how they were going to position this. So I am interested to learn more and kind of the takes that they had.
Oh, thanks for teaming me up there, partner. So this was actually one of the, I think, more interesting pieces or data points coming from the article. And it's really comparing and contrasting the differences between what buyers are actually telling us what they want and what they need from their sales or their revenue professionals and what sales leaders are actually hiring for. The biggest thing that stands out to you, Alex, what is the thing that when you first see this, what just pops you in the face?
I mean, to be totally honest, you didn't ask me this question in any of the prep work that we did on this. So this is kind of a hot take. They were talking about virtual selling, but they've highlighted active listening. Active listening is a very physical skill, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it is. You need to have cameras on. You are a far more energetic, you're a far more demonstrative person than I am. in order to convey active listening skills most effectively, you're either in person or you're doing it via video. Second to that, you can conduct active listening just audio alone. It's more difficult. It is also more time consuming. It is a lot of reframing what somebody's saying, asking if they're right, making affirmation statements. Yes, I understand. That can be difficult to do over audio alone in a virtual setting without derailing the conversation. Each time that you say something, it could be interpreted as wanting to jump in. It could be interpreted as an interruption. So I think that's a little bit interesting, particularly as it comes from LinkedIn, in that they're saying we need more virtual sellers. I think what they're really trying to say is you need to be selling through LinkedIn, but you don't really get the benefit of active listening through a platform like that. You need audio, but really it necessitates, or maybe not necessitates, but if you want to get the most impact out of it, you need to have video, which, and again, this is just kind of a quick take on what I'm seeing here, but active listening doesn't seem to directly tie back to LinkedIn's value proposition.
No, that's really funny, and I totally did throw you for a loop, and that was truly a hot take since I was not.
Thanks for that. I appreciate it
for any of the prep whatsoever. But it's funny. So let's take LinkedIn out of this concept. Let's take LinkedIn out of this, because I do think the data, or at least the data point from the buyer's perspective, is really salient here, right? And this is one of those things, and this is why I take issue with LinkedIn saying this is buyer first era now. Research from Gartner, research from CSO Insights for years, that the 2018, this is one of my most quoted sales research studies, thanks to my time at the Miller Heiman Group. It's the B2B buyer preferences study from 2018. But basically what they said is that 70% of buyers can't differentiate between sellers, period. So for a long time, there's been this growing gap between buyers and sellers. And so the active listening for me just stood out initially because how often have you been sold to in which the seller is just trying to show off how smart they are, and they're not actually trying to listen to you as an individual?
That's another great question. I think it happens a lot. I think it happens with people that are earlier in their careers. You and I, we share a sales mentor. We'll call him Kevin because that's his name, but we'll hide his identity. They're not referencing. Yeah, we won't dox Kevin. But one of the things that Kevin often coached new people on, and he coached me on it, he probably did the same for you, is talking about kind of the sales persona. It's how you talk. It's the kind of cheesy salesperson, what you expect to see in a used car lot or a movie about salespeople. People have the tendency to do that. Humans have the tendency to emulate things when they don't know what they're doing, when they're uncomfortable in a situation. So I feel like earlier in somebody's career, they're going to be more likely to want to be the smartest person in the room, to command the conversation, to demonstrate their presence and not their active listening skills or maybe their passivity in the situation. And I think as you start to go up the ranks in both kind of career seniority, but then also kind of effectiveness or performance in a seller, you tend to see that active listening is a core competency of theirs. They're good at it. Some of it can be trained. You can do what I was talking about. You can lean forward towards the person that's talking. You can point your feet in their direction. You can't really do that on video anymore. But you can also make kind of affirmation statements, demonstrating active listening through things like that. But at the end of the day, just an innate level of curiosity is going to get you a lot further. If you're interested in the other person, what they're talking about, and you're interested in what kind of mutual success looks like, that's going to drive active listening far more than anything you can train your team on.
I love that. And I actually really enjoy you bringing that up, and even talking about where people are in their careers, being early to late stage, and what that may or may not look like, and how some of those capabilities or skill sets may develop or change based off of where they are in their career trajectory. And this is kind of interesting. Let me go back to this, right? So LinkedIn shows that buyers want active listening, problem solving, confidence, relationship building, oral communications, technology proficiency, and years of experience. I almost did a bad gesture there, so I'm not going to do that. over here we have the concept of the revenue engineer. This is your baby. This is your nugget. Why don't you talk to us a little bit about the revenue engineer, some of those concepts of what buyers are looking for, and how this might be a new way to think about somebody in a revenue capacity, and how you might think about them or even go about hiring them. Maybe that's too much for us, but thinking about identifying those characteristics and how you place them on this graph.
Yeah, I think it's interesting how those listed skills in LinkedIn survey ties into the concept of revenue engineers. This was kind of the founding basis of future salespeople. It got started as an idea when we were working together, I don't know, 8 or 9 years ago, and a book came out from great author Daniel Pink, To Sell is Human. I think his most popular book or publication is Drive. It's around motivating people, but he digs into social psychology and talks about kind of the underlying motivators for people and how to drive things forward. But similar to your CSO Insights study from 2018, he positions 8-9 years ago that the way that people buy is changing, and it's changing more rapidly than it ever has before. In that, sellers need to adapt to the change or they're going to die. So if there is not this shift, there's not this change, we don't create this new future salesperson, FSP, then a lot of salespeople are going to go extinct. And in his book, he mentions that somewhere around 80% of the US workforce is in some sort of sales capacity. Maybe not direct sales, but specifically that they're motivating people. And he puts things like doctors and teachers into that, or ed med as he calls it.
Absolutely.
Because you need to trade somebody a gain for something of value. Mm-hmm. Kids see outdoor time, recess, video games as something that they're trading for education. People that are unhealthy see getting into the gym, not eating a quadruple cheeseburger as something that they're trading for better health and wellness. So in some capacity, most of the population does sell on a day-to-day basis if it's not kind of a direct exchange of money for goods. So all those people need to change in not being a sales professional, but as we call them, revenue engineers. And this is bridging the gap between revenue marketing and sales engineering that you see in a lot of different sales organizations and businesses these days. So revenue marketing is traditionally going to do things at scale, self-service revenue. It's marketing that is measured through direct or indirect revenue acquisition, as opposed to just awareness and things like impressions. Sales engineers are typically going to help facilitate some sort of sales process. They are people that are experts, and they are the ones that should be showing up to those phone calls, and they are being the smartest person in the room. So how all of this ties back to kind of the previous slide with those skills, I think you can plot all 7 of those skills somewhere on this scale. I think most of them are going to fall into that middle area where you don't see the overlap between revenue marketing and sales engineering. But that's not to say that those skills aren't still valuable. If there wasn't a future for salespeople, you would see sales engineering and revenue marketing meet in the middle and cut out sales professionals entirely. Instead, there are things that I think you can focus on in each area of these as you're looking to evolve your team into more effective revenue engineers. Active listening, I think particularly, is going to probably fall a little bit closer on the scale towards sales engineering, but they all have a place.
Yeah, it's interesting, Alex, and I love deviating from plans, as you may know, and flying by the seat of my pants.
Where are we taking this?
No, I'm sorry. Yeah, you hate me, but I was actually just going back through this. So when you were saying all this, going into the next part of our conversation as it relates to business development, it was kind of funny thinking about that a little bit to some extent, right? So active listening is what buyers want from sellers, right? And we're also talking about the skill set that's could be more towards our marketing, more towards a sales engineer. And what's interesting out of all this too, though, and like this is where I put some work on your shoulders here, Alex, is what LinkedIn is saying, and this is where some of the self-serving aspects are coming from this in many ways, right, is that it's harder to make contact with people. It's harder to resonate. It's harder to get people to want to connect with you and want to take calls or listen to you in some ways. I have a couple reactions to that, but how does the way that you hire your team or the individual that you have, how does that reflect your business development strategy, right? So like we're seeing here, right? So up here, 90% of C-suite, they don't want to respond to impersonal B2B attempts. We see that there's the rise in pre-COVID emails and a decline in actual responses. But going back to your point about the revenue engineer and what buyers are looking for, how do we start hiring differently or maybe looking for a different persona or characteristics in who we hire to have more success in business development, if that makes sense?
Yeah, this is a curveball. I feel like you prepped me on this stuff, and then you had a second list of questions that we were going to go through, just so
We're going to
I
record
could
this
think
second
on
one.
my feet. But it's a good question, right? The way that the skills are listed in the study is around hiring, and you can manufacture interviews where you're teasing these softer concepts out. It's not how many years of experience they have. It's not the domain or background they have in a particular type of product or industry. You need to be careful about it. Everybody needs to be on the same page. You can't have one person test each one of these skills. You need to kind of divide and conquer, but probably have some overlap to check and make sure that you're getting an accurate read on somebody. But when it comes to these skills and hiring to make somebody more effective at business development, I probably put critical thinking and technology proficiency on the top of the list. You need somebody that's a problem solver. If you hire somebody that comes in and you give them their tools and you say, this is how we run business development, this is how we sell, they're going to see that as a prescription in a lot of ways. These are the emails you send. This is when you send them. This is how you reply. These are the objection responses that you give. Even if people are good critical thinkers and they have high technology proficiency, they're still going to start there. You don't want somebody coming in and trying to rewrite the playbook on day one, but you do want to hire somebody that's going to try to be innovative and somebody that's going to try to do something different, because that's going to help the entire organization grow as a whole. They're not going to be right all the time. You might be able to learn more from people failing in those tests and trying something new than you do when somebody succeeds. Then once you find success, you apply it to the rest of your team. So I guess to answer your question, like how do you use those skills in a hiring capacity to find somebody that's better at business development? It's critical thinking and technology proficiency. I guess kind of didn't touch on technology proficiency and the why there, but you want somebody that's going to be able to pick things up quickly, but really iterate through technology to help automate and scale things faster. I think it's interesting that these numbers were included in that same article where they're talking about the rise of virtual selling, and then they almost discount email. And again, it's coming from LinkedIn. It could be opportunistic, but their math here actually shows that email is more effective in the time of the coronavirus, because you've seen almost a 60% increase in emails, but you have not seen an equal decline in the amount of responses. So more emails are getting out, more responses are being made, it's just at a lower rate, which makes sense. But it kind of undermines their value again, and I think it kind of distracts from the point.
Well, now I think just to kind of bridge a couple different things here, right? So we're talking about people, we're talking about how we'd hire to help with business development. And you're right, you know, this was certainly a curveball, but critical thinking, leveraging technology to do such. But I think that also represents in many ways the larger picture that we have when we look at some of these stats too, right? And more about the philosophy that we would take and have others take with regards to conducting business development to begin with, right? And this is part of your point too, Alex, where it comes back down to problem solving, being a critical thinker, right? And this is one of those things that I see a revenue engineer really doing well. And this is, I wish I could take claim for finding this study. This was you. But what revenue engineers I feel do really well is they look for inspiration and ideas in other channels and apply it within their core expertise. So they're more generalists in applying their generalism and their specialities, but talk to us just a little bit about business development, media consumption, and just kind of this thresholding capability about trying to get a hold of people. Coming back to this data specifically here, getting back to where we prepped, my friend, of, hey, email's not working, but it's working. Digital is working, but it's not working. Executives want to talk, but they don't want to talk. Talk to us more about media consumption and this omni-channel approach.
Back to the prepped material. So this is interesting. I'm a voracious reader, so I can't even tell you where I first came across this or why. But I'm always looking for things, topics, ideas that have some sort of cross-functional application within the sales or the revenue world. I think this one definitely fits. So it's essentially outlining the differences in media consumption between different generations during the time of the coronavirus. So it kind of ties back into LinkedIn's article as it relates to the coronavirus and how things have changed and will continue to change. And it's more marketing centered. So we're probably more towards the left-hand side of that scale with revenue marketing, but this is even softer. These channels that we're talking about here with online videos, video games, broadcast TV, physical press, it's all very impression-based marketing, kind of that more communications or traditional marketing. So it's not quite to revenue marketing. But what I find interesting here is the omni-channel application of media and how to really get in front of, in this case, millennials, and it compares it to Generation Z and then also baby boomers. And it's no one approach, no one generation where individual is going to get all of their information from one media source. Similarly, you shouldn't think about engaging your buyers through any one channel. I don't think that's what LinkedIn's arguing. LinkedIn's not saying use LinkedIn, email's dead. They're saying use LinkedIn in conjunction with email. And we ascribe to that. You need to be hitting people through multiple channels and as many as you can, really. So email and social are big. You and I have always done a lot of business development via phone, but now that everybody's working from home, it's a lot harder to engage somebody in that capacity. So why aren't you exploring things like videos or audio clips or screen recordings to try to engage people and to give them timely and relevant content in the same way that media and ad companies are looking to target their specific audiences? I think it's a direct kind of one-to-one connection between the application here in media and how you can also do it in sales. And the benefit there is not only the exposure, but you had mentioned kind of our concept of thresholding, where you want to make sure that you're hitting people across multiple channels, the email, social, phone. You might want to try different medias like PDF attachments, recorded video, screen shares.
Wolfine from The Office, if you remember that from like, where it's like, you're going to fax them, you're going to a phone call, you're going to page them. You're gonna have
you might not want to do it all at once.
Especially during COVID, but before COVID.
And that's a very good point. You don't want to do it all at once because you're going to have people out there that you can send them 12 emails in a day and you're not going to get their attention. You can have people that you call them once in a month and they are going to block your phone number because they just don't like to communicate on the phone, or they assume you're one of those many spam dialers that have been happening for the last year and a half. So you need to kind of find the mix for each person. And the best way to do that is to start, I think, kind of in a middle realm. You want to hit multiple channels. You don't want to be overly aggressive, but you don't want to be too passive either, because then you're not going to hit enough of a threshold for them to respond to you. And really what you're looking for is a response. You want that to be positive, but at the end of the day, any response is better than no response. Yes. Exactly.
No. I hear it. I totally hear that. A no is probably actually one of the best words a sales professional can ever hear. I think sales professionals or revenue professionals have always been told that no is a bad thing. A no is probably one of the most amazing things ever. The one thing, just to tie this back into the concept of the revenue engineer, you mentioned this is mostly on the left-hand side of the marketing realm. But I think that's a really important note, Alex, to call out, right? Is talking about a revenue engineer and talking about how they bridge both revenue marketing and sales engineering. When you're thinking about how you can hire for somebody in this buyer first type of world, according to LinkedIn, or anybody who's just been reading the tea leaves for the last couple of years, you're looking for somebody who can find an idea, run with an idea with minimal oversight, right? Like, isn't that what you're really looking for? Like, what sales leader, what chief marketing officer doesn't want somebody to go through and try to figure out how they can do a podcast for the company, come up with a live stream, come up with some of these things? It just comes down to bandwidth, energy, the creative juices that people have to some extent to actually execute these things. And so in so many ways, like, this is maybe you disagree and throw me underneath the bus here, please do. But like a revenue engineer in many ways has to be a generalist to have success so you can start finding a signal. So you almost need to be that generalist so you can find that layer of specificity. And so that's my diatribe there.
Yeah, there's a couple of things I'll disagree on, but I do agree. I think you're very much right in concept and presentation. A few details that grind me there a little bit.
Give it to me. Let's get
the first one that you brought up was what sales leader or revenue executive wouldn't want their salespeople to run with something new.
Okay, fair.
I think it totally makes sense if you are testing out a new email, if you are trying a new talk track, switching up your voicemails, do it. Personalize it to yourself. It's going to make it feel more authentic. Authenticity sells a lot better than most things. When you started going your examples of videos and blog posts and things like that, that's a little dangerous and potentially on what somebody says. It could add risk to the organization. It could directly conflict with
that's fair.
Things
I
coming
wouldn't
from
want
marketing.
A Fortune 500 organization doing that. Let me caveat it with if you're a 10-person startup, maybe that's a little bit easier.
Yeah, 10-person startup, I'd say the world is your oyster. The second piece around kind of the disagreement is, revenue engineers should be generalists to some degree, but you can't really start there. You don't usually see people enter an organization in revenue marketing and say, I want to expand my skill set, I'm going to become a salesperson. Nor do you see people start in kind of
you let people in sales try to leave sales to go to marketing.
Exactly.
Right?
Sales is an entry point where you kind of expand into the rest of the organization. Some people never leave, like you and I. But in that, you want to make sure that these people understand their core competencies and how they are providing value to the organization. That's where they need to start. When you hire them, that needs to be very, very clear. Because if you explain to them that your expectation is that they become a revenue engineer and they're a generalist and that they should be doing all of this testing, they could lose themselves in it. And they could go too far down that path where they're not really executing from kind of the core responsibilities and accountability metrics related to their role.
That's such a good point, right? Is that they can kind of get lost in this building or this ethereal state of just trying to find a signal to go ahead and hone in on. And no, that's a great call out. So I am properly chastised. I appreciate that. Alex, what else do you need to claw back or make better since I've opened my mouth in these last 20 minutes together by chance?
No, it's all good. I appreciate the curveballs. It made me think on my feet a little bit. Generally, I think the content coming from the article where maybe its intent is opportunistic and self-serving, I think it is good. I think it's important to present those skills, those softer things, because they do have a significant impact in the effectiveness of your team, the effectiveness of your reps. I hope that we can maybe bridge the gap between those statistics and those points to value. Because active listening is valuable, critical thinking, technology proficiency, all the things on those lists are valuable. How you execute that from a hiring perspective and an optimization perspective, how you kind of relay that into omnichannel outreach, those are more difficult concepts, and I hope we can kind of make an impact there as we hammer out different topics and ideas in the round robin.
Well, hey, I mean, this was number one. This wasn't too bad.
No, it wasn't. We didn't screw anything up, I don't think. I don't know. I
mean, it'll be pretty interesting. I'm going to stop recording here in a second, but I totally think that this was a very typical guest Voice-Slavic thing where we planned it and then still went off course. And that we'll do one in which it's totally on course, totally to the script. But
I not want to. That was fun.
We'll see.
Oh, I mean, I think ultimately the funny thing here when you edit this together, and I expect you to put this entire statement in there, is because it was our first time, we didn't have a sign off. I mentioned to Andrew, we should probably say bye to everybody. So thanks for the time. Appreciate your attention. If you ever have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. It's Alex and Andrew from Future Salespeople. Look forward to seeing you next time.
Thanks. Let us know how we can be better.